Okay, what we're going to do is to work on this tree. This was one of dozens, and it seems like it had a great promise. So I'll take it out of the container. We notice that the root zone is all white. Excellent. This is what we want in a black pine or any of your pine. This is your beneficial fungus that coexists with a healthy pine tree. So we got a great start. What I like about this tree is at the root zone we have very interesting and bold root flare. And then as you go up the trunk, it has nice movement and good taper and plenty of branches to work with. So that we're going to put this into a bonsai container today, and we could get to the next step where we'll start to work on the quality of the branches. And at this point, we could take and lightly cut. Lightly cutting roots stimulates growth. Heavy cutting stunts the growth. So now what I plan to do is to put this in a container and spread the roots. I know some people like to cut everything off, but I find it better to save as much as you can and then spread it into a container with fresh soil. Let's talk a little bit about selection of the pot. Now this is no ways finished, but because it has enough good features, we're going to put it into more or less a bonsai pot. Now if this was a little bit rougher, where I needed to develop a little more, I would either go back in the same container or mica pot, which is like a training pot. Okay, now I could put it in here, which is good in that it's large, but the proportion seems way out of whack. I could squeeze it in here. The bonsai will look good, but it's such a small container. This is more appropriate as a finished bonsai rather than still in the refinement. So I'm going to compromise and put it in here. It's big enough to accommodate fresh soil, but not so big that it overwhelms the plant. Now that we have the container prepped and this is ready to go, we're going to put it in here. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of the fresh soil on the bottom and give it this little wiggle. That way you get a good contact with the roots, but not so hard that you damage the tender roots. And then we're going to pack it. But remember I said that this had good bacteria or mycelium? So take this white and then mix it in the fresh soil. Or if you have another tree that looks sickly, otherwise healthy but just not vigorous, then you can do the same thing. What this does is it makes all the roots work more effectively. So that's what I'm doing, is taking the good healthy part and then mix it in there. So now this soil has been fortified with the good mycelium. Okay, and then we're just going to pack it. I hope you still remember my soil formulation. The formulation is 3 parts compost, 1 part sand to 1 part lava rock. And then at this point we need to pack it in, and we had discussed a little bit about this custom-made chopsticks. So this is the disposable kind you get at the restaurant. These are the ones that I made. And then so as we get into packing, sometimes the one that is a little larger than your your typical restaurant type, this works a little better. If it was bigger, I'll probably have to use a bigger one, but I think for this is about the right size. So that's what I'm going to do, is to go around and start packing very carefully. Now, okay, this is more or less done. You might want to have some very fine chopsticks, because when you go about to detail around the roots, we don't want anything heavy because it'll damage the tender surface root. Well, there's a weed. But that's why I said you should get into making your own chopstick out of bamboo like I do, or any kind of wood. But you should have, you know, very thin ones for detail work, your everyday one a little bit bigger, and then as you get into bigger projects, bigger one yet. Actually, this is probably your front. It looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do next is, there's a series of cut that I did. One over here where I used my rough pruning tools out in the field so I couldn't get it clean. Now is our concave cutter, and give you a flush cut. So that stuff is to make sure all the cuts that I've done far is nice and clean. Now that you have the front, we have actually, and part of it is intentional in that it helps to fatten that area. But now in this plane we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 branches, and they're going to start forming a bulge. So I'm going to get it down to 1, possibly 2. So I'll study that and decide what to do. So we'll take a very close-up look of this tree. Actually, it's kind of hard to tell which is the front. Back side could be the front, or this could be the front. Actually, either one looks good, which is a lot better than some tree has no good front. This has 2, and cut off the rest. So I'll go with my concave cutters because I can get closer. And then this one, there. There's a little bit of bulging here, but I think that'll be okay. But I might go ahead and try to clean it up just a tad so that we don't run into problems in the future. Okay, and then when we get up here, remember, outside the curb we want a branch, but we don't need 2. So I got to decide whether I want this one or this one in its place. This one looks like a slightly better location, so I'll take this one off. Okay, so we got that, and then as we go up, this is on the outside curve again, and there's too many branches, so I'm going to keep this big one and take the others off. Okay, now as we go up, we don't want this to elongate. Now, if I left this one without touching it, this is just going to keep shooting straight up any taper. So I'm going to take this shear and cut it off here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do with all these is pinch the tips so it will fill in. This one is probably not going to stay forever, but I'm going to need something in that spot, so I'll go something like that. Now this branch probably should be pulled down, and this one probably should be pulled down. That angle is better when it goes down like that. Now I have two choices. One is to use a string and pull it down, which what I normally do, but it doesn't look so good when it's in a finished bonsai pot. So I'm going to use the dreaded wire. Oh. Anyway, there are times when it's necessary to use the wire because of the way it looks. The only thing I have to be careful is that I have to attend to it, make sure it gets removed. It's gone to the point where every time I use wire, one of my regular students kind of chuckle. And actually, about the only time that you see wire on my project is the one that I did as a demo. But like I said, in a situation like this is a better method than the string. Okay, now the technique that I'm using is the one in the middle to two branches. So I started on the trunk, put at least 2 loops, avoid the needles, well, at least as good as you can, and wire around the branch. Don't twist the plant or the branch around the wire now. Okay, go. And this one's easier because there's not much needles in between. And make sure that it's wire around the branch, not the other way. So keep going, keep going. Wow, just about right. And then at the end, what you do is you turn back a little bit, right? So now we have our wire cutter. Okay, one thing that we want to do is make sure that these two are not on top of each other. So by wiring, you could move one forward and one behind. What happens if they get on top of each other, this one will shade this and they'll eventually get weak and die. The other thing we could do with wire that you can't do with the string is to put a curve on this. This was so long and straight. Now it has some movement, a little more interest. So I think it was one of those necessary evils, even for me, to put wire on that. But we're about there now. I'm just going to finish up the base. But at this point, let's not put any fertilizer. It's a good habit to get into whenever you have to cut a root like that. Avoid fertilizing for about a month, sometimes 6 weeks. This one, we didn't do anything really harsh, so it's almost safe, but I think it's better not to take a chance on a situation like that. So I'm just going to wait. Okay, now this is the finished product. If you could accomplish this in 5 to 6 years from a seed that you collected, you're doing very well. If you look at the trunk, this being the oldest part, you see we have no bark yet. On the black pine, it takes about 7 years to start forming bark. And this is just about there, so I'm guessing that it's probably 5 or 6 years old. Now, if my memory was better, I could tell you exactly for sure. But that's one of the ways to tell, is that probably by next year, on the 7th year, this will start to form a bark. But this is approximately what you want to be able to do in a very short time for a pine. Now, if you want something very grand, we're looking at 20 years. You want something better, you better live